Yes, good morning, everybody. Really great to be here. It's actually my first time at Interchange, and I've really enjoyed it so far. There's been an incredible buzz, some great conversations, lots of positive energy, and clearly some big challenges that are on the table. To misquote Guy Garvey, perhaps somewhere in all this talk are all the answers to these challenges. So I'm Alex Holland, I work for Hitachi, and today I'm going to talk about net zero transportation, but I'm going to have a particular focus on the challenges around power provision for net zero. So I'm going to be talking about different transportation modes, including shipping, road freight, buses, rail, looking at the different pathways that they're taking towards net zero, and looking at the particular challenges that they have around power provision, and then trying to understand what transport operators and what cities can do to overcome some of these challenges. So just before I get going, just a quick introduction to Hitachi. You probably heard of us, but just to explain a bit about why we're at Interchange today. And why this topic is important to us. So this topic is really about three main themes. We've got transportation, energy, and sustainability. And these are all very fundamental, actually, to our business. So first of all, we are a transportation systems business. So as you'll probably know, Hitachi Rail make trains, make signaling systems. So for example, the UK's first intercity battery hybrid train that's recently been trialled here in the UK with Transpennine Express. And also now that GTS are part of our group, we're leaders in urban rail, for example, at TfL, and also light rail transit, so including here in Manchester with the Metroline system, which is one of the largest of the LRT system networks in Europe. And all that is supported by our tram centre of excellence, again, here in Manchester. And then even beyond rail, so we do systems for powering electric bus fleets, for example, First Bus at many locations here in the UK, and doing vehicle battery lifecycle management. So we're a transportation business, but we're also an energy business. Hitachi Energy is one of the biggest suppliers of technology to utilities, to energy grids, but we also work on the other side of the meter, so working with transport providers, for example, to help them to access and manage the power they need to do electrification in a way that enables them to control their costs and to reduce their carbon footprint. And then finally, we're also a digital business. So Hitachi Digital, it's actually around about a third of our footprint here in Europe. We're leaders in industrial AI, and this is something also that's super important within our energy and our transportation businesses. So that's us. So back to the main topic then. So sorry, the topic's not written up anywhere, but just as a reminder, this is pathways for powering net zero transportation. So the decarbonisation of transport is having profound consequences, actually not just on the transportation sector, but also on the energy sector. And whether we consider modes like road and rail, where net zero is more connected with direct electrification, or whether we look at other sectors like shipping and aviation, where it's more about green fuels, in either case, the decarbonisation of transport is putting and is going to continue to put a huge amount of strain on the energy system, demanding an enormous increase in renewable generation and an enormous increase in grid capacity. So let's start by looking at shipping. So this vital artery for the global economy that is also responsible for nearly 4% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So the shipping industry is looking at various fuel options for decarbonisation. It's kind of working its way through. It's looking at options like LNG, which are a bit lower carbon, but ultimately still a fossil fuel, long term, not really going to be green enough, but perhaps a transitionary fuel. It's looking at biofuels, which is a greener answer, but actually there's a lot of competition for biofuels. It's really not going to provide a scalable answer given these supply side constraints. And really the long-term answer looks to be these hydrogen-based synthetic fuels, sometimes called e-fuels, like e-methanol and e-methane. And the issue with these fuels is that they are incredibly energy intensive to produce. So to paint you a bit of a picture, it's estimated that in order to decarbonize international shipping, we're going to need around 46 million tons of green hydrogen to make enough e-fuels every year. And that hydrogen is going to require something like 2,300 terawatt hours, which just sounds like a big number. It's about equivalent to the amount of electricity that the whole of the EU consumes every year. So kind of eye-watering numbers. Where is all this extra power going to come from, and how are we going to get it there? Well, in the UK, the money is on offshore wind. So if you've looked at NESO's Clean Power 2030 paper, you'll see it's talking about tripling offshore wind capacity in the UK to around 50 gigawatts. And again, here Hitachi is playing a key role already. We provide the HVDC infrastructure that connects offshore wind like Dogger Bank to the mainland. And indeed, offshore wind is this fantastic resource for the UK. So as you may know, we've got greater capacity for offshore wind than any other country on the planet, apart from China. So it's a great potential for us. But of course, the problem with wind energy is that it is so variable, it's so hard to control. And when you try and integrate large amounts of this energy into the grid, it's hugely destabilizing. And you end up having to spend a lot more money on storage, on balancing, and on curtailment of the wind. Now, one potential solution to this is to look at harnessing some of this wind power actually directly. So rather than connecting it to the grid, think about connecting it directly to onshore electrolyzers to make green hydrogen and then make green fuels. So now the variability of wind becomes less of a problem because you simply make fuels whilst the wind is blowing, and then you store those fuels, like an energy store. So this is actually a nice potential opportunity for marine ports who are situated nearby windy seas that may have available land and which are looking to stimulate economic growth around the port. And Hitachi is already working with Arcadia in Denmark on one of the world's first large-scale e-fuels production plants, and we believe there's going to be many more of these. So we believe this is an important new industry where we're going to see a lot more of this kind of hydrogen production and e-fuels. So let's now move onshore and look at some other transportation modes, such as rail and road, where actually it's more about direct electrification and less about these e-fuels. So in an electric mainline rail system, trains will typically take their power from the overhead catenary, which gets delivered through the pantograph on the roof of the train. Sometimes it's delivered through a third rail. But the challenge here is that in only a few countries do you actually have full coverage. So in Europe, actually, the only country that has 100% electrified tracks is Switzerland. In the UK, it's actually less than 40%. And the problem is that it just costs so much money to electrify these tracks. It requires an enormous amount of upfront capital, very, very long payback times, not a very attractive proposition. Now, I don't know how many of you were able to catch Jim Bruin's talk yesterday in Interchange 1 room in the afternoon, but a great answer to this is what we call hybrid trains that are able to take advantage of the catenary, but also use battery technology. So a good example of this is the Hitachi tri-mode trains, already running in Italy for a few years and have recently been trialed in the UK with the Transpennine Express. These trains are able to use the overhead catenary when it's available, fall back to battery when it's not, and then as a last resort, fall back to diesel. And the battery is actually able to charge whilst the train's on the move, directly from the catenary, or whilst it's at the station to be able to take advantage of high-powered chargers there. So now let's think about road transportation. So in this sector, electrification is really having a profound effect across the whole of the value chain. So let's start by thinking about road freight. Electric heavy goods vehicles obviously have shorter range than normal trucks. They take longer to refuel. So there's bound to be an impact on operations and duty cycles. And then there's this whole chicken and egg problem around the truck OEMs who don't want to build trucks that the hauliers aren't going to buy. The hauliers don't want to buy the trucks unless they know it can work for their business in terms of their operations and that there's going to be enough charging infrastructure. But the charging infrastructure providers, they again need to know, well, where should we be building the infrastructure, and do we know there's going to be enough demand? So to solve this conundrum, Hitachi is working in the Electric Freightway program. So this is an Innovate UK funded program, actually led by GridServe, but which also includes the main truck OEMs like Volvo and Scania, hauliers from all over the country, and then freight distribution nodes like ports and factories and supermarkets. And the objective is to work out how can you get EHGV to work for UK road freight. The role Hitachi's playing is we sit in the middle of all of that, we collect all the data, we run the innovation trials. One of the questions we're looking at is, well, where do you build these charging hubs? Where should GridServe be looking at investing? And of course, the right hub location for the transport industry might not be the place where there's enough grid power. GridServe's approach here is to use their sun-to-wheel technology, so they build a grid-scale solar and battery farms co-located with the charging hubs, so they're able to power those charging hubs using a combination of that power and grid power at the same time. When we're looking at inner city transportation, the biggest challenge is often actually just grid capacity. So bus operators often find when they approach the DNO to talk about electrifying their depot that there simply isn't enough capacity available. They become waitlisted. And the question is, well, okay, how long do I need to wait for what we're calling the Great Grid Upgrade? Well, here, again, Hitachi has been part of a government-funded program, in this case an Ofgem-funded program called Optimise Prime a few years ago, working with the DNO, UK Power Networks, and fleet operators like Uber and Centrica and Royal Mail, trying to figure out that between them, how do you make the most efficient use of the energy system so that we can charge our fleets without requiring an immediate grid upgrade. Through this program, we learnt an enormous amount about electrification of road transport. We even created our own smart charging system, Zero Carbon Charge. And we also learned that it's really important to engage with the DNO as early as possible, not just to find out about available capacity, but also to explore creative ways in which you might overcome these challenges. So in some cases, for example, you can negotiate a flexible connection where they'll give you access to more power, but you have to either commit in advance to your charging schedule or perhaps agree to be turned down at different times of day. Obviously, then you've got a few more challenges around how you manage your energy in the depot, etc. You should also definitely look at smart charging. So this will take a limited available amount of power in your depot and make sure that you're optimizing how you're distributing that power to your vehicles based on their operational schedules. And you can also look at, of course, supplementing the power that you have from the grid with local renewable energy and battery energy storage. Finally, another thing that bus operators should consider is en route charging. So Hitachi has deployed this in cities like Geneva, where we put flash chargers on bus stops, and it means that the buses, as they dwell for 20 seconds or so to pick up and drop off, they're able to get a good top-up. This means that the buses actually can get away with smaller batteries. That means more room for passengers. It also means that you don't need so much power actually in the depot. So you kind of spread the problem a bit. So what does all this mean in the context of a region or a city? And something that I've heard talk about a lot at Interchange over the last couple of days has been this concept of place-based decarbonisation. So this is like a city-focused, whole system approach to doing transportation, energy, and sustainability. So it's about considering the specific needs of a locality, which will include households, businesses, and transport, and then holistically planning energy infrastructure around all of it, rather than just focusing on the transportation bit itself. And then trying to manage the supply and demand of that system to be as flexible as possible. So for example, a bus hub could be a really good focus point for this place-based decarbonisation. They're often located in deprived areas where there may be energy poverty, often alongside other energy consumers like local industry, office blocks, etc. So rather than just looking at the depot, think about the wider community around the depot. Start to think of that depot as a potential energy hub, somewhere where you might invest extra in renewable energy generation and in battery energy storage. And then think about how you might be able to share the excess generation and spare grid capacity with the surrounding households and businesses. So for example, you may have a bus operator that mainly charges the buses at night, located near a factory or an office that tends to produce, so it tends to consume electricity mainly during the day. So an example, we've put microgrid technology into Skagerrak football stadium, a football stadium in Norway. So they've covered their rooftops with about 6,000 square meters of solar panels, generates about 800 kilowatt peak power, and through the microgrid and battery energy storage system, this PV system doesn't just make the floodlights come on, it's also able to provide the local neighborhood with locally produced green electricity. So I see I'm pushed for time. I'll try and summarize quickly. So transportation systems are becoming more complex. We're seeing more demand-responsive services. We're seeing more complex multimodal integration. We're seeing more complex energy requirements. And energy systems are becoming more complex. We're seeing new types of assets being added to the grid. We're seeing generation become less centralized, less controllable, more weather dependent. And so we're also now seeing a new class of digital solutions that are able to balance supply and demand in these ever more complex grids, and which are capable then of fully integrating energy into the transport system, but also integrating transport into the energy system. So as a transport operator, you're able to access and manage the power you need for electrification, but you're also able to play a role in the balancing of the energy system. So much for the technology side of things. I think the bigger challenge actually is how the cities and the transportation operators, the energy providers, the technology providers, and the cities actually all collaborate better together to provide the best services in a sustainable and affordable way. And actually, of course, this is what Interchange is all about. So look forward to continuing the conversations here today. I'd like to thank you all very much for your time. If you'd like to find out any more about what I've been talking about, do come and seek me out or any of my colleagues. We've got a Hitachi booth located across the hall over there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Alex. I want to, please take a seat.
Thank you.
I do want to, shall I come closer? I'm going to come here. There we go. Right, I do want to go to questions from the floor immediately, if there are any questions that anybody has to ask, because I know we're always a little bit short on time. Does anybody have any questions at all? I will ask you a question whilst people are thinking about questions then. I mean, you touched on it briefly. What steps should transportation operators take now to ensure that they're ready for the future powered by green energy? And how can they align themselves with the evolving energy infrastructure? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, great question, Nicola. So I think, as I've been saying, it's about taking this kind of whole system approach. don't think about transport as transport and energy as energy. I would say, so I'm going to say come and talk to Hitachi, obviously, but I think importantly, find a partner that is both an expert in transportation, but also in energy and also in digital. Because I think it's really the intersection of all of these points that's really going to unlock the biggest value and to prevent the wrong kinds of decisions being taken up front.
Right, that's really key then, essentially, isn't it? And again, I mean, thinking about the growing demand for green hydrogen, electrification in transportation, what innovations, I should say, in energy storage and distribution are critical to making it viable at scale?
Yes, I mean, we're really just at the start, or even not even at the start of the kind of hydrogen revolution. You know, we're really seeing just small-scale production. I mean, certainly, in terms of energy storage, yes, we'll see more grid-scale battery farms deployed around the UK. But ultimately, I think that green hydrogen is something where you can make better use of direct electrification from, for example, offshore wind, so that you don't need to go via the grid, you don't need to then add all that storage to the grid, and actually you produce the hydrogen, and you could store that hydrogen or then produce the green e-fuels and then store those fuels. And that, in fact, becomes your energy store. And effectively what you're doing then is matching highly volatile, non-dispatchable production from wind with actually very, very flexible demand from e-fuels production. And you can simply, as I said, make e-fuels whilst the wind is blowing.
There's a key message that you would like to get out there today to everybody who's turned up. What would your key message be?
Oh gosh, one message.
Or key messages. You may have key messages.
So I would say, look, everyone's asking, are we ready? Is the technology ready? I think broadly, actually, in most cases, we've kind of got what we need. So I think for road and rail, the solutions are there. I think for shipping, it's not straightforward, but I think we can see pathways where we can decarbonize shipping. The big challenges, of course, are around aviation. I'm not sure anyone really quite understands how you're going to decarbonize aviation at the scale that we have it today, but hopefully, this will be an area of innovation over the next decade or so. But I think the answer is don't wait, start planning. Like I say, partner up, consider the whole system approach, and in particular with cities. So cities, they do long-term planning. They need to understand the best use of land, the best use of infrastructure, taking this place-based view to look at not just demand, but also what assets, what resources we have, thinking about, transportation is a great example where if you prioritize transportation, you actually end up decarbonizing a lot more, providing a lot better services for the community. So these are good areas where you might look at start building these energy hubs.
Great stuff. One last chance for any questions, anybody? If not, let's wrap it up there. Alex Holland, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Alex Holland, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.